Cool. Thank you everyone for coming, and thank you for having me here. This is my first time in Russia. It's very cold, but inside here it's very, very warm. I've been joking that this is the most snow I've seen in such a long time. When I woke up this morning and yesterday, it was so wet outside. I was kind of blinded by the snow. But again, as the kind of introduction talked about, I'll be talking about blockchain governance and basically what that is. And basically the goal of this talk is to explain this one sentence. Blockchains help govern world-sized organizations. So that might be a little bit of a mouthful, but I'll break it down word by word. I'll start with blockchains and kind of what I feel that they are kind of good for. So I highlighted the word blockchain right there, and so that'll be the first word I'll be talking about. So again, what are blockchains good for? Blockchains kind of make a lot of things really easy. Essentially, they're an always-on computer that you can access anywhere across the globe. Essentially, it's always on, and it's basically permanent. What I mean by permanent is that you can store it. Well, let me talk about the underlying technology for a little bit. So underneath this blockchain is a bunch of computers. They're running across the globe. They all have the same database, and you can only add data to this. You can't change any data on it. And so that gives us the property of basically being permanent. And so that's good for a few different applications. Basically, it's allowing for the possibility of having things that are always on. And so the second word that I'll talk about is world scale. Comes out as a result of having blockchains and having these always-on computers all across the globe. So yeah, world scale. What do I mean by world scale? So let me break it down by talking about different applications. So blockchains enable world scale money or programmable money. And so we can go from an IOU that maybe this room can trust, right? I might trust Sergey, and we might exchange something for an apple for an orange, or a dollar for something else. Right? And that's something that doesn't really scale too far. But instead, beyond that, we can have something like fiat money, where we actually have some nation or maybe a central bank that backs it, that we can always redeem that money for. And so that gives us another level of scale. And now we kind of have Bitcoin. So that's something that allows world scale money. And so that might be a large concept, but basically, it comes out as a result of having always-on computers where anyone can access, anyone can always turn to, and you don't have to trust the other person that you're transacting with. You can actually just trust the running system to make a transaction, right? And so that's kind of what Bitcoin is. We can also have programmable value or world-scale value. And so what that means is instead of having an oral contract, as we talked right here, a verbal contract, you can actually have something, again, that is a smart contract, right? So walking through those three examples again, instead of an oral contract where I might promise to sell you my house, and I might go back on my word, right? People used written contracts, right? That we use a court system to kind of adjudicate or kind of resolve disputes. And now we kind of have these smart contracts that run all across the globe, right? So a popular example of a contract that has been running all across the globe are these series of ICOs that have been happening in 2016 and 2017 on the Ethereum blockchain. And so these are kind of smart contracts, again, right? It's a contract that anyone can trust. So anyone in this room can participate, anyone back in America or in Asia, they can all participate and they can lock up their Ethereum and they can get something else in return. And you don't have to trust any kind of bank. They don't have to trust any other contracts besides what they can read. There's nothing hidden. And so by combining these two things, we can kind of get organizations, digital organizations. So again, I'm going to talk through the 3 examples, essentially of increasing scale. So instead of just a crowd, which is just maybe us in this room, we can have something which is a company where we have formalized rules for talking, for interacting, and now we can get to kind of digital organization where we kind of combine all these resources, put all the rules online, and then we can use those and have the blockchain itself kind of resolve different disputes. So again, I kind of talked about 3 different examples in order of increasing complexity. Talked about money, which is just a transfer of value, $1 from me to you. I talked about a transfer of just value in general, right? Which could be a voucher, it could be a ticket, it could be a share in a company, it could be a lot of different things. And I talked about the most complex thing, which is the combination of all those things, right? In a kind of company, we use shares to incentivize people, we use cash to incentivize people, and we also have punishments as well. We can take that cash away if someone does something bad. Right? So organizations are things that are a little more complex. But the property that blockchains allow from us, again, they're always on. We can see all the data that's running, and we can use this to create composable programs, essentially. So what is composability? Since, again, a blockchain itself is a computer, we can think about each application or each contract that's written on top of it inside of something, again, that's its own contract, but other contracts can essentially reference. So what Ryan here is talking about is an example of, this is like, so what Ryan here is talking about is an example of a composable application. So each thing here, so he talks about a tokenized S&P 500 asset. So what he's using is Augur, which is prediction market. So you can make markets, you can bet on that market. So an example of a market might be betting on the outcome of a football match, right? Or the price of a stock, and what that might be at the end of this month. And so they've created a market, which can be some asset on the S&P 500. They've hedged it with 0x, which is a decentralized finance protocol, an exchange protocol. So you can actually trade these assets. They wrapped it in DYDX, which is another derivatives protocol built on top of 0x, and they bundle that together with SET, right? And so instead of hacking together something in one weekend, that might just be a social application where you can message people back and forth. We actually have something that is a little more powerful. We actually have something where you can build basically a very, very complex financial application in one weekend with one coder, right? Because of the fact that blockchains are totally free, totally open for anyone to play with. So I talked about world scale as a concept, right? We have world scale money, we hopefully should have world scale value, and we have world scale organizations that are kind of bundling together that set of things. And now I'm going to talk about what organizations are at a very, very high level. Organizations make goods. What are goods? An apple is a good, knowledge is a good. All these things are examples of things that people want, right? And we just want to make more things of what people want. And there are different classes of goods, and different organizations are good at making different things, right? So the few examples in economic terms of different goods are private goods, which are things that the market can resolve. So if a farmer makes an apple, there can be other farmers that create apples. People can invest in those apple farms, and they can make a return, right? And so the other examples of goods are public goods, which might be knowledge, which I hopefully am sharing right now. And that should be able for anyone to use, anyone to kind of copy, right? But they don't always get produced at the rate at which we would like them. That means like the benefit that I would get is not as much as what the whole society would benefit from. And we have club goods, right? A national park might be an example of a club good or a common good. It means that it's something that we essentially would like to have, but there aren't any rules for trampling on these commons, so to speak. And so, ideally, on the blockchain, we should be able to represent all these different types of organizations. And so, I'll just walk through a few different types of organizations and what their kind of blockchain counterparts might look like. So, banks, what do banks do? Banks pull together a bunch of different resources, money usually, and risk management, and they allocate money to other individuals that hopefully should pay it back. And so, Maker is an example of a kind of digital bank, right? So you put in your Ethereum, which is one type of cryptocurrency, and you are able to essentially mint this other token, which is called DAI, and you're able to do it basically at an interest rate. Right now, that's 0.5%. So if you want to refinance your house, now would be a good time to do so on Maker. And governments make rules. They're another type of organization that can be put on the blockchain, right? So governments essentially collect taxes from every citizen, right? They have a deliberative body that makes rules, allocates that money, and also makes rules for all society. And there's something that can be put on the blockchain, and I'll kind of get to how that is able to happen in a little bit. And finally, have universities, which is another type of public good. They create knowledge, right? So they bring together teachers, students, resources, money, labs, to create more knowledge that people can use. And so these bundle of resources can be represented on the blockchain. And so what is governing? So we've talked about blockchains and basically what they're good for. It's basically the ability to make everything clear across the globe. It's an always-on computer. We talk about what world scale thing is, and that's something that can be used by anyone across the globe, whether you're in America, here in Russia, Asia, it doesn't matter, right? And you don't have to trust the other party. You can actually just trust the underlying system. We've talked about organizations and the things that produce the things we want, and how they can be represented on the blockchain. But we haven't talked about how these things are governed, or essentially how they actually produce the sets of goods. So to walk through a simple definition of what governance is running an organization. Governance is making a set of decisions, a set of rules that each individual has to abide by to create basically the thing that we want, the good that we want. This is no easy feat. They're hard to run well, right? And that's for various different reasons. Why are they hard to run? Well, sometimes someone has too much power, someone doesn't have enough power, sometimes we don't have enough resources, but oftentimes it comes down to a breakdown of essentially the decision-making rules within one organization, right? So we might have a team of 5 or 6 people, and they work really well individually, but it's also really hard to get everyone on the same page for whatever reason. There might be a little fighting, there might be a little office politics, I think we've all faced that kind of situation before. And so, how do we actually govern people, or how do we actually govern organizations? So basically we want to strip away all the complexity and make sure we can answer these 3 simple questions. So who holds decision-making power? There might be Alice, there might be Bob, there might be Charlie. All these different people are decision makers, right, within one specific network. How do they actually make decisions? Does Alice hold all the power? Does she make all the decisions? Does she have to consult Bob and Charlie? Or is it something where they all collectively vote, right? Are they voting equally? Does Alice have the same voting power as Bob? Does Bob have the same voting power as Charlie? Those are all questions that need to be answered again, at a very high level? Or is it something where they're essentially shareholders, right? Alice might hold 50% of the voting power, Bob and Charlie each might hold 25%. So Alice can be voted to 2 times to the each half that Bob and Charlie do. And what are the incentives that Alice, Bob, and Charlie are really thinking about? Is Alice motivated by, does she want more money? Does Bob want to advance in the organization? Does he want more voting power? All these different things impact how things are governed. Again, to recap, we usually make decisions. Uh-oh. Was that me? Okay.
We'll try to fix it.
Okay, no worries. There we go. Yeah, so again, just a quick recap. Basically, because blockchains themselves, as we talked about, are decentralized organizations, they run on every single computer across the globe, we usually need people to vote, right? There's no one central decision maker, and that makes it tough to make a decision in general. So anyone in a blockchain system always has to vote on the decision of an outcome. And so, broadly speaking, what are the incentives? There are 3 incentives that usually motivate people within an organization, and maybe any individual themselves. So that's usually money, it's usually power, and that's usually influence, right? And so, what do these really mean? So money is pretty self-explanatory. It might be more equity, it might be just more cash, it might be a property or something else. It's a monetary incentive that we think is really important, right? And that we want more. What is influence? It's social influence. It's how many Twitter followers you have, it's how many Instagram followers you have. It's the ability to basically have more fame or essentially more social influence. And power, that's pretty also easy to explain as well. That's having a higher rank in your organization, that's having more voting power within this organization, and it's the ability to basically take away something from someone else. Again, these are again pretty abstract, but we can also put them on the blockchain. And what does that really mean? So we know it's pretty easy to put money on the blockchain, right? Bitcoin is a store of value. It's digital, so to speak, and that's a type of incentive for people. Ethereum, as we kind of talked about before, is able to capture or create or mirror any other type of value. We can mirror the dollar and its lack of volatility. We can mirror equity in a company, so we can mirror all these different types of financial incentives. In terms of power and influence, how do we put those on the blockchain, so to speak? How do we make them transparent? How do we make them global? So everyone across the globe can trust that Alice has this amount of voting power, Alice or Bob has this amount of social influence. Those can essentially be represented as tokens. So what is a token? A token might be a token basically, if we have a list of everyone across the globe or everyone in an organization, Alice, Bob, Charlie, we'll say those are the 3 people in an organization. Essentially we can say that, again, Alice has this much influence, right? She has 5 other people outside of the organization follow her, and they'll delegate their votes to her, right? And we just have a registry of who has what power, or who has what influence. And so, hopefully, I talked about how things can be governed at a very, very high level. It's using these 3 incentives and putting them on the blockchain, right? Actually, yeah. Well, let me actually back up a little bit. So when I talk about influence can kind of be broken down into 2 things. It can be your identity, right? So we each have driver's licenses, we each have passports, and we also have a past record of decision making. That past record of decision making can be broken down into something like a reputation, right? On Reddit, there's this example of karma, right? We can upvote and downvote. Reddit is a website where you essentially post comments, And you can essentially upvote or downvote other people's comments to see if they're good or bad. And so this upvote or downvoting is a type of reputation, right? And if we attach it to this identity, your driver's license, your passport, that's a type of social influence. So hopefully you have a little bit of a better idea of this sentence. We talked about blockchains, we talked about governance, we talked about world scale and what that means, and we talked about different types of organizations. And I've crossed out this kind of world scale component because we're still a long way away from achieving kind of any of these things. Blockchains right now don't really work that well. They don't scale very well. Ethereum, as a blockchain, is limited in the number of transactions it can process. So it's limited to, 5 or 10 or something transactions per second, which is pretty low. When we talk about Visa or when we talk about Facebook, each transaction or each message that's sent, is essentially 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000 times the transactions that need to happen to actually run an application like that. So the underlying technology needs work, right? The security of the chain, the security of the blockchain still needs to keep pace with the output, the increase in capacity of the transactions that can be processed. It also needs more people to use it in general, right? So we only have a few million accounts registered on Ethereum, a few million addresses, and only 200,000 people really use it every single day. So when we think about Facebook, there's about 2 billion users across the globe. So we're a long way away from having something that's actually world scale. And it's not very easy to use right now. So the underlying technology needs use. When you go log in, you can buy some Bitcoin on Coinbase or another site, and then you have to move it over to this MetaMask, so you can actually use applications that need cryptocurrency. That's a very, very bad user experience. So some of the work we're actually doing at Commonwealth Labs is to build a blockchain. So Edgework is this blockchain. At a very high level, it's a proof-of-stake blockchain, which essentially is something that you have economic value, and your voting power is tied to how much token you hold in that network. So Edgework is a token. That's the thing that powers this blockchain. So you hold token. You still have the set of computers across the world, and they all also hold this token. And you can delegate token to the set of individuals to validate transactions, those messages that are processed. But Edgework also has this basically ability to have on-chain governance. It puts these incentives on the blockchain. So as we talked about before, all blockchains have this money part right here. Edgework itself is a token. It's also a smart contract platform like Ethereum. And so like Ethereum, you can build any other type of value that you need. You can build shares, you can build basically a bank that prints a non-volatile asset like Maker does. And you can also start to put power and influence on the blockchain. And so that's a little bit of the work we're doing at Commonwealth. But we still don't actually have a lot of organizations that need governing right now that are on the blockchain. There's probably 5, 10 different experiments, and I'll kind of talk through a few of them right here. There's Maker. And so that project, as I talked about before, it basically allows you to put in Ethereum. It allows you to use that Ethereum to mint this new asset that instead of like Ethereum is very, very volatile. It's something that's pegged to the dollar, so ideally stable. So you can actually use it to pay people. You can actually use it to trade and do other things with it, right? It's something that's more useful. And what Maker does is it has this other token that decides what the interest rate of minting that token, minting the non-volatile asset is. And so that token allows you to vote on it. And that's a governance thing that's given to you. Another experiment is, again, the Reddit experiment that I talked about. So our ETH traders is one small community on Reddit where people can talk. They usually talk about Ethereum and other trading tips, right? And so when you upvote or downvote on our ETH trader, you get essentially what's called a donut. Or someone said, you have this amount of upvote or downvotes, and for every upvote, you get a corresponding token on Ethereum. And so basically, that's a way of tokenizing or putting on the blockchain what your reputation on our ETH trader is. That's pretty interesting. So it actually got shut down recently by the creator for various reasons. EOS is another blockchain that's being built right now. It also has on-chain governance. So the people, the computers that are running this transaction database across the globe are basically validating transactions, but they also are able to essentially change who has what amount of token by voting on it, right? So if they think someone is doing something bad on the network, if they think they sent some money to someone by accident, the people who are validating these transactions, the computers that are running the EOS program are able to vote away, that amount of token. And Ethereum itself is also another protocol, is also another example of governance. So Ethereum, as we talked about before, is this token. It's also this world computer, this set of people across the globe that are running the same program, that are validating the same set of transactions, and any upgrade to this network has to be voted on. So the way that they do that now is essentially all off-chain. So the only part that they have on-chain is the money part. But the reputation of developers who are making these upgrades is still off-chain. The voting power that these developers actually have is still all off-chain. And so again, we think it's good to bring these essentially voting power, essentially the reputation of the developers on-chain. So anyone across the globe is able to have a more coherent discussion around that. And so still, it's pretty tough to govern these networks as well, right? Because again, we talked about how nothing is really easy to use. All the software is still focused on developers. It's not really good for any individual to work on. And so voting and discussion is really hard, right? We have a lot of discussion every single day on who makes the bed, on what we should eat for dinner, and when we're making decisions in a blockchain network, that's even more tough, right? Because there's not one place for everyone to come and participate in a discussion. Maybe it might happen on Twitter, which is limited to 280 characters, and those are really short, right? And conversations can kind of get toxic. You can have them on Reddit, this is another website I talked about, and those are kind of often funny conversations. They're not very serious, right? So there needs to be a place for actually having these set of robust discussions. The actual voting on these networks is still not very good. It's not formalized, right? So when I talked about the example of Ethereum, it's something that's still, the voting happens off-chain. So we need a place to actually vote, discuss issues, and converse on these things in an on-chain manner, where your votes are automatically calculated and automatically get implemented into what the software change actually happens. And so that's actually what we're talking about at Commonwealth Labs and what we're working on. So as I talked about a little bit ago, Edgeware is the blockchain that we're building. And so what that blockchain enables is on-chain voting. It's an experiment in and of itself. So it's a new token. It's another blockchain itself where you can actually run different Ethereum-like contracts, and you can vote on new upgrades on this network in an on-chain manner. And on top of that, we're building this voting and discussion board. So underneath this Edgeware, on top is Commonwealth, this voting and discussion platform. And so our small goal on Commonwealth is to help the world work a little bit better. So Commonwealth, again, is this voting discussion platform. Edgeware is the underlying platform that it runs on. And we basically want to help any organization tap into, one, the blockchain in and of itself, to run different applications on Edgeware, and also vote and discuss their issues in an on-chain manner on Commonwealth. And so we're really early right now. Yeah, I hope you guys can all participate in that kind of journey. You can reach out to me here. I'll be here for the next few days. This is the kind of end of the presentation, so I really hope that you can kind of join us on that journey. Thank you so much.
I think we have some time for questions, and maybe you may have a question.
Hello, my name is Grill. We have a lot of experience with building blockchain-based systems, and we have a lot of problems with governing. Can you go in a little bit of detail about Commonwealth? We right now are having discussions with our community. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. We are having discussions with our community on the Telegram, and then we go and implement what they want, and there is a little bit of voting, a little bit of discussion, a little bit of incentives, everything we talked about. But I'm very interested in how are you putting that on the blockchain. So a little bit, if you can, outline what is Commonwealth, how do you put discussion on the blockchain?
Yeah, definitely. So one, we should definitely have a more in-depth discussion afterwards, where I can ask more questions specifically. So basically, Commonwealth and Edgeware are very tied together right now. So on Edgeware, so we work with Parity Technologies, with Gab Wood, one of the co-founders of Ethereum. And so he's building this platform at Parity called Parity Substrate, which allows you to build a different kind of blockchain. And so basically on that, we're building these new modules that plug into our blockchain itself. One of them is essentially a module for identity. So you can tag, your Twitter address, you can post a claim on Twitter, you can, it's digital signature or something like that, and then you'll be able to link your Twitter, your GitHub, or something else, your Telegram potentially, and put that claim on the blockchain. Furthermore, you can add your email address, your phone number, it can be encrypted, unencrypted, yada yada yada. I should say yada, that's, sorry to translate. What else beyond that? So once you tag your identity, we have basically this discussion board, which allows you to create different proposals. And these proposals can be signaling, so they don't actually implement a vote on-chain, but they're actually just a polling mechanism, right? And so people can have discussions around that. They can use their identity and their associated token to see, yes or no. 50% says yes, 50% says no. Once they have, sufficient signaling, someone can actually go out and build that thing, and then they can have an on-chain vote that actually resolves that. This is for Edgeware itself. For any application built on top of Edgeware, you can actually tap into the identity system, you can tap into the proposal system, and you can build basically a new DApp or a new smart contract that basically can use that. If you're talking about another blockchain, we ideally would just plug into any governance system that you would use itself. So you could just plug into the user interface, right? So we're going to support Tezos, we're going to support Ethereum, we're going to support any other layer 1 platform, any other blockchain. So I hope that answered your question a little bit.
More questions? Dillon, I got a question about governance and blockchains. So, if you look at the history, we had this Nakamoto Bitcoin white paper where he says that the basis for voting is one CPU is one vote. So and then we have mining. So mining miners, they are kind of voters. They produce this ordering transaction. They produce a lot of blocks, and over time we see that it's decentralized at the beginning, but then CPUs are different. So we have the graphical card GPUs, and we have specialized stuff like crystals, ASICs. That mining tend to be concentrating in terms of the hardware. And then in terms of also the cost of mining is the cost of energy. And so we see that concentration is actually in the regions where there's a cheap or like subsidized energy. So it's like China, Mongolia, or like East Russia. So we have this, and over time the concentration of voting grows. So I mean, mining gets the pools, you do the other groups, and ultimately you end up with like 2-3 pools controlling the 50% of the network. Yeah. In some networks it's even more, I think, for us. So it's 51% or more. Just because there are some big numbers. So it's not kind of really like decentralized, right? So then we kind of see, okay, maybe we should switch to proof of stake. So let's use the mining is energy like inefficient, so it's dirty. Let's do the proof of stake. So proof of stake is essentially we have a capital. So we invest in the token, some funds, and we have the stake like an equity in this blockchain. So here we can again, so capital is also concentrated. And capital tends to concentrate over time, like get richer, and so we end up with the again big guys who have big capital, we control the system again, so it's not really decentralized again. Maybe then we can also keep both like delegated proof stake, so we can somehow have more like distributed stake, and we vote for some delegates, and they're more or less equal, like 20 delegates. But as we saw with EOS, they can also collude, and they can, there are 20 guys on the like weekly webinar call, and they just decide what to do. So it's kind of a collusion sort of cartel, if you want. So what do you think? It's not a perfect game. So are there any perfect or maybe better solutions you think you dream of for it?
Yeah, so I guess one of the things that I did mention is governance is a very human problem. It's, basically the whole space of human activity is governance, right? And so it's something that basically since the beginning of time we've been talking about. If I were, you would ask Plato and Aristotle the same question, and they would give you a different answer than I would. But I think especially with respect to blockchain systems, what we can hopefully do is once we tag people's identities, tag their social influence, to see how many Twitter followers they have, to see what actually the comments they've made, are they good, are they bad? You can start to allocate voting power to them in a more fair manner, right? That isn't just purely capitalistic, so to speak. Other kind of issues that we kind of think about are essentially how we actually initially allocate the token. The voting power to different people. And so, as we talked about before, proof of work is something where essentially you're continuously mining these tokens, but initially you had a mining rate that was really, really high, right? So maybe 5 or 6 different people got a lot of CPU power, and they were allocated token in the beginning, right? And so also for Ethereum or for any ICO, even if it is a proof of stake token, as long as you have a lot of money in the beginning, that kind of is bad. You kind of like starts to already have this kind of like concentration of power, which in good hands is really good, right? But something actually that we're doing with Edgeware is doing something that's called the block drop, which basically allows anyone that holds Ethereum to lock their Ethereum in a smart contract, allows them to take that Ethereum, lock it up for 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, and they get a variable amount of token in return. So even if you don't have that much token, you can lock it up for 12 months and get more voting power on Edgeware. So at the end of this lock drop, you get your Ethereum back, but you also get this new Edgeware token, right? So we hope that's one way to kind of allocate voting power, at least initially, more fairly. But it really is an on-chain, not on-chain, but ongoing problem that isn't solved in one day, right? Again, Rome wasn't built in a day, right? And so any decision that actually happens on the network, any kind of discussion for allocating money to one developer or another developer always concentrate things or moves things around. So governance is a dynamic problem. It's always something that will continue to evolve, and we basically hope to incorporate the latest research. We hope to add to that in the future as well.
Yeah, thanks. And another question, I think you mentioned this in your blog that you have this concept of research money. Like when you, as a researcher, you can fundraise some money, not going to the public, like to the government or some science fund, but then you can fundraise like with some ICO or some kind of fund from your community, or like you find your funding community who will then have a stake in your research. So how can you elaborate like this? I mean, it's a great idea first of all, and there are many researchers who probably are interested in kind of funding this way. How would it work?
Yeah, definitely. And this way. Forgot. So, where is it? Yeah, universities. So, research, right? This is the main output of universities, right? They also teach students, but as long as you get a PhD, you want to get more research done. So, I think a lot of researchers, at least in the States, would say that money and grants are allocated poorly, right? Maybe to larger academics that have brand names, or people who have more conventional ideas, right? And so, is there a better way to allocate these dollars to produce better research, better meaning things that are more impactful for the world? And one proposal that essentially outlined in a blog post was this idea of the research coin. So, as you said, essentially allocating tokens to different markets that you can kind of create to vote on the outcome of this set of research. There are a lot of different ideas within the space for making better research, right? And so a few of those, I guess specifically within longevity or anti-aging, is this kind of prediction market type approach where you have a market where you can bet on the outcome, right? As we talked about before, you can have the outcome of a football match, or you can have the outcome of a research report. Do you think this actually has, some statistical validity, or do you think this will actually be reproduced or not? And you can bet on the outcome of that. And one proposal, specifically for longevity, is to create an index, essentially that tracks a set of biomarkers. Basically, how old actually. Well, I don't even know what the right way to phrase this is. Basically, your biological age. So we might chronologically be 13 or 23 or something like that, where we can actually see within your cells specifically how old you are based on some number of protein or something like that. And basically, what teams can kind of compete with, what individuals can kind of contribute to, is this big prediction market on how good these teams will be at essentially changing that biomarker to actually potentially reverse aging, or essentially. So what happens is people bet on the outcome of this market. This money gets allocated to different individual teams that are competing on it, and the winner of this market gets more money, and they actually get more funding as a result of that. So these are kind of other experiments that are being run to create more research. So I kind of digressed from the blog post a little bit, but yeah, those are different ideas that are happening right now.
Yes, could be really cool actually to find new ways to finance research. I was thinking initially about some kind of cryptograph that wasn't about the markets, but about some kind of stake in the research. That if you're a baker with research, like you crowdfund some research, you may have some, like maybe you see the results first before the market will see it. So you have some benefits, because normally research it's not these companies, you cannot have profits from it. You can just have some, very marginal kind of, benefits. But still, this could be a good idea. Another idea could be probably to have some kind of research questions market. Like some people post research questions and like they upvote and put back those questions with some funding, and then some research teams see those questions and they can jump on it and compete for the answers. This is something to
No, I love all those ideas, and it's never an easy problem, right? Because it's formulating the questions, it's funding the questions to answer those questions, it's seeing which researchers are better. There's other proposals again for funding other public goods like quadratic voting. Essentially, what you do, you might have $25, and essentially what you'll do is you'll be able to buy 5 votes. So the amount of dollars that you use, you take the square root, and that's the amount of votes that you have. What a few researchers also discovered is that when you do quadratic voting to allocate money to a different researcher, you fund it at the socially optimal rate. So you fund at the rate society actually finds the most utility from, the most benefit from. And so research is one of those examples that is really high, and I wish we should definitely pursue, for sure. Yeah.
You said about research. So as a researcher myself, the whole idea. So when I do research, it's usually you're usually on the frontier. If you say this about research, so there are not that many people in the world who can understand usually what you're doing, and you need experts to decide whether what you're doing is good or bad, because ultimately you give this decision making to the crowd. There could be a risk that the type of research projects that will go through will be sort of not very important ideas, marketed very well, but ideas by some sort of sleazy researchers. So maybe that's not something that you would want to have in the society.
Yeah, no, it's, what types of questions should be funded, right? That's not easy. I mean, I think what we can potentially do is to, in math, right, I feel that, blockchains is very near to I guess the core blockchains are very well-known research problems, so we can kind of potentially give a grant for answering those problems. And put those in smart contracts. That would be one way to talk about things, but, as we've kind of seen with Kickstarter and even with ICOs, there have been bad projects that will be funded in the beginning, but hopefully as the kind of public becomes more educated on these sets of things, the money gets allocated better over time. And better tools should also be built for informing people about the outcomes of these different things and things like that. So, it's a very tough problem, for sure.
It's a very tough problem, because you have to kind of compromise between the democracy, that every person have a vote, one vote, or there could be some experts which are more experienced and they have more power, but then they're subjective, because this is the problem also in the grants. When you apply for the grants to some foundation, well, how they make decisions, right? So this is really unadvised, or some kind of agenda which you probably not be funded with research. So it's not so easy. But maybe you can combine some of the two, the experts and the backers, some communities which should be involved in. So it could be some wisdom of the crowd. I guess. Any more questions? So maybe last question, what are your plans for this year with the edgeware? How do you what do you want to achieve, the milestones of
No, thank you for asking. So the goal of Edgeware, so we've already launched 2 testnets. So testnets are basically running the blockchain and having a bunch of different participants across the globe participate. So we launched one testnet in December. We launched another one this month in January. But again, a testnet is not something where you have essentially a tradable token. We want to launch a mainnet in June, on June 1st. Basically, we've already built the set of features that we want in it. So we have identity, we have governance, we have different proposals that can be implemented. And so the biggest goal prior to launch is spreading the word about Edgeware itself. So we have as wide a distribution on the Edgeware token to Ethereum holders as possible, right? Because we want to bootstrap the network with as many active participants as we possibly can. Post Edgeware launch, we'd like to have probably 20 or 30 different protocols, 20 or 30 different smart contract developers working on different projects on this network. So they should be using the Edgeware token that they've already received, and they should be able to vote on essentially the future distributions of Edgeware token. So one aspect I didn't mention before was that essentially also Edgeware also has a block reward in and of itself. So that's new token that's minted to allow for different validators, there are different computers around the globe that are validating transactions, and they get money for validating those transactions. But another portion of this block reward goes to a whole treasury, and this treasury, people vote on the allocation of this money to different developers that are developing on this platform. So we hope to fund this 20 to 30 groups around the world to develop on Edgework itself. And another goal of Edgework later this year would be to actually implement 2 features that are on the Ethereum roadmap more quickly. All right, so one problem with Ethereum that I talked about before was the fact that it doesn't really have on-chain governance. It's totally informal. You know, developers, a small group of developers get on a weekly call and they talk about 5 or 6 different issues, and if you're not one of the developers, then tough luck. Right, so if you have Edgework, you can actually vote on-chain and you can implement the Ethereum roadmap more quickly because everyone can participate in this open process. And that's kind of what we think blockchain should be. Everyone should be able to participate, right? It's run across all computers across the globe. So yeah, the 3 outcomes for Edgework would be to 1, allocate tokens well to the community of Ethereum holders, to actually fund 20 or 30 different projects from the on-chain treasury, and 3rd, to actually implement new upgrades from the Ethereum network on Edgework itself. Yeah, those are the 3 goals for Edgework.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you for having me.
Let's please applaud Dillon.